Don Fraser and I went and had the privilege of meeting with Dean Christine Snyder, Dean of Academic Foundations at Minneapolis Community and Technical College, and Mike Christensen, who's the Director of Workforce Development at Minneapolis Community and Technical College, about this thing they were doing, which we're going to hear more about today. But it's this partnership between the public schools and the community colleges to make more opportunities for students to graduate from high school, but also to graduate not just necessarily with credits, but maybe even with an associate's degree when they graduate from high school. So we're very privileged to have Mike and Christine here. Thank you very much. Christine or Mike, whoever's first.
Good afternoon, everyone. The dirty little secret about me is that I'm really a middle school teacher that plays in post-secondary. I started off as a middle school teacher, social studies and language arts in Baltimore City. I taught there for 8 years. If you've ever seen The Wire, they would film the prison cafeteria scenes in my middle school. So that's my claim to fame. And because I love teaching middle school so very much, that all of the work that I do now is to pave a way for the students that I taught in Baltimore City to access what they need and deserve in post-secondary. And so that's the light I bring to this work, and that's the quest and the vision I bring to this work. Luckily, for me in the snows of Minnesota, I married a Minnesotan and left the middle school world behind and kind of found myself here in post-secondary. First as an education instructor, and then now in this role, which I started in January, with a fire under me, because every day I think about what is the ethical relationship we owe to our students. And every day that's the kind of way I enter into this work. So the questions that guide our work is like, how do as a community take collective responsibility for our children? And I enter that knowing full well, as a former middle school teacher, that middle school blames elementary, high school blames middle school, and colleges blame high school. And so it's pointless. It's a pointless conversation. It's not even worth the breath that it takes, because the reality is that they're all our students. So we need to get away from the blaming and just get to the partnership and get to the point where students have a way forward. What can we as a community college do to serve as a bridge to improve educational equity? That's key for us. You know, on our campus, we're 56% students of color, and it is absolutely incumbent upon us to make sure they all graduate. Do they all graduate? Not right now. Not right now. But this is part of the work that makes us reach back into the high schools to think about what we can do, not to tell high schools how to do it, but to learn from them what they're doing and to support the work that they're doing. And the last one is like, what if we believe that every single student is capable? You know, and part of that is getting beyond the testing conversation that like, you did not score this on the AccuPlacer test. Therefore, you cannot take this college class. How do we get beyond that? And I think that there's ways through partnership that we're able to make that happen. Luckily in the state of Minnesota, we're given a lot of gifts. The legislature gives us a lot of gifts. One of those is PSEO. Currently, we have 298 PSEO students at MCTC. It's a 22% increase over the last fall. We're really working hard to improve our PSEO population. We know that now the legislative gave us a gift of allowing 10th grade students to take career and technical education. And so we're really pushing that as the entry point. The nice thing about PSEO in 10th grade is that all that is required is they pass that 8th grade reading MCA test. They don't have to get into the AccuPlacer world, and so it gives their feet wet early on, and we can go from there. The legislation also changed, allowing us to advertise, so we're working very closely with districts to make sure how we do that really serves the most students. The other thing we're doing is how do we help them to make the right choices? PSEO students are younger. They don't know all about the MNTC, the transfer curriculum. So we've been working with particular schools to really illuminate a pathway for them. So Fair Downtown is a stone's throw away from MCTC. And so currently we're working with the principal of Fair Downtown to say, we want all of your juniors and seniors to take PSEO, but we want them to take the right classes. so that they graduate high school with their MNTC completed, and that is a ticket to ride, right? So if you want to come to MCTC through Power of You, which I'll talk about in a little bit, to finish your associate's degree, awesome, we'd love to have you. But if you want to go to Mankato, if you want to go to the U, we just want to set you up in such a way that you can write your own ticket. So we're pretty excited about that, the partnership that we're developing there. FAIR imagines that we'll have about 150 to 200 PSEO students as we continue to build this partnership just from FAIR. And they're changing and adjusting their enrollment cycle to admit more freshmen and sophomores to realize that their juniors and seniors will be off campus. So they're changing the way they even enroll students there. The other thing that we have as a gift for us is concurrent enrollment. So PSEO is the free college courses that take place on our campus. Concurrent enrollment is the classes that take place during the high school day. And that's another, if we're thinking about how do we scaffold so that each student feels comfortable in enrolling in college when they graduate from high school, part of it is a combination of both. The concurrent enrollment makes sure that students can take in all of the things that they want to take in high school. They can do their sports. It doesn't interrupt their day. They can really embed that into their regular high school life and all the things that bring them joy in their high school life. But it also gives them college exposure. It also gives them a college transcript. And we can start to say, like, look, you were successful here. You did this here in 10th grade, in 11th grade, in 12th grade. And so that means that you are cut out for college. We started with career and technical education specifically because we could find a way to think about a student's resume at high school graduation. What should that look like? I don't want to put on a high school graduate's resume, I took a couple college classes. Instead, I want to put on a high school graduate, you earned an entrepreneurship certificate in business. So we think about how those classes can stack to mean something so that it illuminates a pathway, as opposed to just saying, I took an English class, I took a math class. Congratulations, it doesn't put anything on your resume. It doesn't help you to move it in a way you can package it to get yourself further faster. So essentially at Southwest High School we have a business, we have 100 students in our Introduction to Business class currently. At South High, we actually have a full associate's degree in education. So we have 17 students. Only 3 are future white teachers. So we're pretty excited about trying to grow your own teacher population there. And we're working closely with the district right there. We have them into Introduction to Urban Education and Reflective Practice. They'll take Technology for Educators in the spring. Those are all 10th grade students, so we've mapped that out. At Roosevelt High School, the Minneapolis Public Schools put in a welding lab, and so we're starting to use that as a pathway into a welding certificate in college. And then we have a healthcare pathway that I'll talk a little bit more about that kind of is agile and helps students to figure out where they want to go next in the healthcare fields. At North High School, we're working very closely with Dr. Barry, the principal there, who's amazing, in cinema. And so we right now have students in the cinema history class, which is an MNTC goal area 6. And then they'll be taking cinema production. If you've ever visited North High, they have a beautiful room with most of the updated equipment needed for you to do cinema production. So they're really building that as part of their Arts and Communications Academy. At Broadway High School, which is the school for pregnant and parenting teens, we're working very closely with them. They have a new initiative that has all of their students get Chromebooks. And so they need some infrastructure in which to help them understand to use those Chromebooks. So we're offering an introduction to Microsoft Office, which is part of our BTech, Business Technologies degree, which can lead you to just a 2-semester legal assistant, which can then, because we've backward mapped that they can take some of those classes in high school, 1 more semester, and you have a livable wage job to support your kids. So we're thinking very deeply about all of those different pathways with those different schools. So as you can see here, the entrepreneurship certificate at Southwest, it's a short certificate, but we are offering 4 of the classes at the high school. Because of the Higher Learning Commission requires that 20% of any degree take place on our campus, they'll come over to us and take financial accounting and supervision and leadership, and they could graduate high school with something that they can put on their resume. It stacks beautifully into our business management degree. Or they can just take it wherever they want to go. You know, we don't want to force them to come to us. We want to open up, we want MCTC to be the portal that takes them to wherever they want to go, that they've built confidence, and then they can feel comfortable where they want to go. And then South High, like I said, if you're familiar with Minneapolis Public Schools, they have a memorandum of agreement with the Native community. So part of the way that we built that AS in education is to honor that commitment with the standards that are required for all Minneapolis Public Schools teachers to use. So we're really kind of indoctrinating those future teachers in that way so that they feel comfortable moving forward. We also worked out with Minneapolis Public Schools that at high school graduation, they would be guaranteed an interview as an associate educator, because you might not want a 19-year-old teacher in the classroom. So you want to think about how do we make sure that in high school we use that opportunity to build better teachers, and then create a nestled learning community after they graduate from high school as paraprofessionals. And then we worked it out with Augsburg and Metro that they can immediately go into there and finish up their licensure and set them up on what we hope will be a good pathway for them. Roosevelt High School is interesting because it is a healthcare pathway. So what we're doing is we're using existing AP and IB coursework to really illuminate pathways for students. In that, we also currently offer the Healthcare Core, which is a nationally recognized curriculum, to the Roosevelt students that are in that academy. We also offer NAHA, which is our certified nursing assistant, so that they're able to kind of get their feet wet in the profession while they're still in high school. We've worked it out that we're also adding Spanish for healthcare providers. Part of that is that Roosevelt is the high school of the immersion pathway in Minneapolis Public Schools. So they were looking for something that would challenge their most sophisticated Spanish speakers. And then we are adding these PSEO classes, anatomy, physiology, and lifespan psychology. All that works out is that you're only 43 credits away from your degree in nursing. You're 47 credits away from your degree in polysomnography, which is sleep technology. Both of those are high-wage jobs. So essentially, we're saying to the students that if you work on the pathway that we created, starting in 9th grade, that just after high school graduation, you have 2.5 semesters and you're done with your associate's degree. And we've worked that also with AS in biology. The 43 credits then transfer seamlessly to the University of Minnesota, setting people up for a really smart pathway moving forward. The other thing that we're running into is that MCTC is the #1 college for Minneapolis Public Schools, yet about 1/3 of the population of MPS graduates come to MCTC, but only 10% of them test college ready on the AccuPlacer. 10%. Does that mean the test is broken? Maybe. Yep, we're looking at that as one of those options. Does it mean that we need to think about how we use that senior year, which is not required for students to take math? Most definitely. And so right now we have a pipeline project at Washburn and Edison. So we have a Math 75 class, which is a developmental math class. We have 25 students enrolled at Washburn, 25 students enrolled at Edison. They're being taught by the high school teacher, mentored by our instructor, Scott Storla, who's done this amazing job putting this curriculum together. It really kind of does what all the research wants us to do in terms of mindset, getting people to think, how do experts approach math? How do I approach math? How do I have to change my thinking patterns? How do I become more flexible in my approach to math? So they're currently enrolled in that. At the same time, taking a college success class, which introduces them to all of the different support services on a college campus. So those students come to our campus once a month to go to the Learning Center, to access the resources on our campus, to feel like regular college students, which they are. And then in the spring, they'll take statistics, which is a goal area 4, which is a hard one for our students and often impedes students from graduating with their associate's degree, is because they need that math credit. So now what we're saying to Minneapolis Public Schools is we can come up with this strategy so that your students, that only 10% of them were testing college ready, are now on track for getting their goal area 4 completed before they leave high school. Now you might be asking yourself, well, who did you recruit, Christy, to this program? And the thing is that we looked beyond AccuPlacer. None of the students took AccuPlacer to qualify into this. And MinSCU allows that. So a lot of people have the impression that AccuPlacer is the gatekeeper. If you look into Mctcmovie policy, they set us up beautifully to make sure that we can innovate, and that's what we did here. Here we use plan scores. We use teacher recommendations. Based on what Paul Tuff had done in terms of like grit, perseverance, resiliency, we had the math teacher fill out a recommendation based on those non-cognitive skills. And then we sat down, the math teachers of the high school, our instructor Scott Storla, and they made decisions together. Because the reality is that we both have skin in the game. We don't want, as a college, the students to fail, and the high school absolutely cannot have their students to fail. So why should we allow a test to determine that when we have two sets of teachers that are willing to come to the table to look at who will be successful? And currently our students are being incredibly successful. So if that continues to go well, the district says that they're going to roll that out to each of the district high schools. The other thing that we're doing, we're not just working within Minneapolis's borders, we're looking at the inner ring suburbs as well. We have another pilot at Cooper High School, Armstrong, and Columbia Heights, which is a STEM scholars pathway, kind of recruiting more future scientists and STEM students of color. And to that, we have kind of the similar setup as the Reimagine Math, but instead we have a pre-calc pathway. So what we are doing with Minneapolis right now is the pilot for liberal arts majors. We need a pilot for STEM majors as well. And so that's what we're doing here, is kind of trying that out. With intermediate algebra, we have a STEM exploration course, which is a two-credit college course. We have our science faculty that are going to provide mini camps so that they can really explode the definition of what that means to be a STEM scholar. And then they'll take pre-calculus next year as a full year-long class, and all students will be encouraged to take a PSEO science course so that they have that option. And then all of those students are eligible to apply for the Power of You. And that's the thing that we're really seeing, is that the Power of You, which is a last dollar scholarship program for recent high school graduates, to make sure that they can take away the barriers of finishing their degree. This is the thing that I'm most excited about and most proud of. Actually, if you followed legislation very closely, in May there was a little blip that basically said developmental ed could be covered through PSEO if it was attached to an earlier middle college. What that means is that we can have a situation where students that are on the verge of dropping out, they're over age, they're under credit, they're about to say, this isn't for me. Instead of saying, hey, come back and do credit recovery in front of a computer screen, we can say, we can set you on the path to college. That PSEO that was suddenly only for your middle and high achievers is now for you. We can figure that out for you. So we've been working as a career and technical pathway to say, you don't want just your high school degree. That's just little. You need your college degree if you're going to get a livable wage job. And that's what we're after here. We want to change our entire community, and part of it is engaging the kids that don't think that this is for them. And so with this, we've developed 4 different academies: the Public Service Academy, Digital Media, Health Services, and Building Trades. And for students in ALCs, which are Alternative Learning Centers or Alternative Learning Programs, they can now access developmental education, which means that they can use their PSEO credits to accelerate to their high school degree, and then transfer over all of those credits to their ultimate goal, which is a college degree. Because we can't say that a high school diploma is doing it for us anymore. It really is the college degree that we need to look forward to. So practically what that means is that in your junior year, if you're behind in credit, you're over age, and you're about to think about dropping off, how do we partner closely with districts and schools to come up with a plan, for an individualized learning plan for every single student in that situation? You want to do machine tool technology? Fabulous. Let's map out that, not just what it takes to get to your high school diploma, but to your college degree. So for example, this human services pathway, we're really thinking about what classes should they take at the high school, what classes should they take at the college, and how can we make sure that all of those are dual credit so you're graduating faster? Because a 3-credit English course essentially is about 1 year and 3/4 of what you need with those the 2 accelerated English courses. So we figured that out so that you've earned all of these college credits. You're accelerating your high school pathway. We then earn your high school diploma, and then you join with us in Power of You. We'll pay for the rest. We'll make sure you have the support. And just 2 semesters later, you have an AS in Human Services. And Mike is going to tell you how we've been working the other end to make sure all of those students have a way forward into a job with Hennepin County. We're really excited. We're not just working with Minneapolis Public Schools. We're working with Minneapolis Public Schools, Brooklyn Center, Robbinsdale, and then Hennepin County has been really involved because they're super excited about changing their outcomes for county-supported youth. And right now, if you dig into the research for county-supported youth, so kids that have been incarcerated, foster care system, pregnant and parenting teens, they're not so good. And so they've been really devoting resources with the Minnesota Visiting Nurses Association on these engagement sites to get students back connected to school. So we currently have an engagement site at MCTC. There's one in Brooklyn Center. And they're basically going out, the nurses, and making sure they're making home visits to these pregnant and parenting teens. They're figuring out what is the right school population for you to enter back into to make sure that you can continue to receive your benefits. And so we're working closely with them. And they have care coordinators, which are fabulous. There are these situations where these are devoted a care coordinator for each different alternative learning center or alternative learning program, including what we're calling destination diploma to degree, that will be devoted to making sure that students show up. They have the mental health services that they need. If they need addiction counseling or that sort of thing, we'll provide that for them. And then we have each of the districts are willing to jump on board and have collaborative planning together so that each student has a hallmark experience. So we've started to meet weekly to figure out what are the services that these high-touch, high-need students need in order for them to be successful, because we know that they need more. We know that they deserve more. Their lives have been difficult, and now is the time for adults to get together and create a concerted care network around them so they can be successful and access the PSEO dollars that the state is saying, hey, come use. And now we'll come up with that plan. We've been working very closely with MDE. The applications to be able to use this legislation just recently came out. They're due November 30th, and MDE has said that because I've been working with them closely on the whole design of this program, that we should know the next week. We will have students starting in the spring. Robbinsdale anticipates about 30 students starting in the spring. We have Minneapolis about 20, Brooklyn Center starting slower with just about 10. The other thing that we did not realize is that with PSEO and ALC and ALP populations, they can use PSEO in the summer. And so we can really extend that to make sure that they can do that and really use all of their PSEO dollars forever. So we're using that partnership with Hennepin County, which Mike is going to talk through in just a second, about how they're diversifying their workforce. So where this program is positioned to take students that have disengaged from school, have disengaged from their possibility of the future, put them on the track, and then create a livable wage job for them on the other end. Lastly is the Power of You scholarship. It hasn't gone away. We have done a lot to reform it, so it's that last dollar scholarship. We have 250 students that entered into Power of You this past fall. We've made a lot of changes based on some of the research that came out of Texas to really create an identity of Power of You scholars. So we're really trying to create friendship. We're using integrated advising models to make sure that they're getting the best information possible. We're really pushing everyone to go 15 credits. It's only a 2-year degree if you take 15 college credits each semester. So when people say I'm on my 3rd year of my 2-year degree, there's a problem there. And so we need to really help students to plan their lives differently so that they can get through faster. Yeah, and we're expanding that. We think that all of the work we're doing with the high schools is going to start people stronger, and they'll be able to finish faster and go on to where they need to go from us. Yeah. Thank you.
She's a middle school teacher, charismatic, interesting. I was trained as a lawyer, so I'm combative and difficult. I should never, ever follow her, but I'm so grateful to be invited by Don and Grant to this great group. Many special friends of MCTC in the audience. If I could take a moment and just thank them for coming. Christy and I appreciate very much Larry Poggemiller being here with the Office of Higher Education, our state colleague. We're colleagues in state government, although people don't think of it that way. They think of McTcmovie as a separate system, but he fights every day to make sure college is affordable. Tina Maynor is a great Minneapolis educator. Say hi, Tina. She'll be speaking to you on December 9th. Grant's goal is to have everyone from his church speak to you. Tina and I have been in Grant's church for 3 decades together, and she is terrific, so we want you to refer all your students to our college place. Don Fraser has led a public discussion on how we invest in the next generation for as long as I can remember. I lived in his house when I was 8, when my dad was running for lieutenant governor. In those days, you didn't have any money, so the congressman would give his house to the endorsed candidate for lieutenant governor, so our whole family got to stay in your beautiful place. And I remember then that we walked to Van Cleve Park, but you can't do that anymore with 35W in the way, can you? Julie Schweitzer's here from the U. MCTC has increased its transfers into the U from 70 in 2009 to 350 last year. Okay? So we are not the new general college, but our new president used to help run the general college at the U and is a great friend of Julie's, Avelino Mills Novoa, who is doing a wonderful job at MCTC. Grant, we've talked about it. Dane Smith is here from Growth and Justice, has written that the community and technical colleges are the delivery system for closing the unemployment gap. That is the case. All that Christy presented to you today is not only important, but it's necessary. This is what I've learned from my own experience. For 2.5 years, I have recruited students into the Viking Stadium. The first college feeder system in the history of this state has been developed behind the Viking Stadium, thanks to the work of Governor Dayton, who had the courage to raise minority and female hiring targets to 38% combined on that project. Our 59% student of color population and St. Paul College's 60% student of population jumped into the training partnership with Summit Academy. Remember that? Dane's written about that. We recruited heavily from this community, from the North Side. Why? Because the North Side has an unemployment gap. Are you aware of that? Now, on this particular point, as with all gaps, as Aesop said, when all is said and done, more is said than done. Dane and I are fascinated in developing a delivery system, and we're recruiting partners. And 2 of those partners are the Local Incentive Support Corporation, LISC, and Cura. With the city of Minneapolis, they did research on how many people represent the unemployment gap on the north side of Minneapolis and did it by race. So as you can see here, the total number of African Americans unemployed are almost 2,500 on the north side. If you compare that to the white unemployment rate, you would have to employ about 2,000 African Americans that are currently unemployed to close the gap forever. We have 2,000 MCTC students from the north side. There are 2,000 workers at the Viking Stadium. Do you see how the math would work? If we somehow magically were able to recruit all those students, and we didn't, and we won't, into those construction trades or that Viking Stadium project, the gap would be closed. What Christy's doing is she's laying out pathways across all interest areas in very high placing professions, and we are going to close the gap. And we're going to do it like St. Paul's doing it right now in this city, like Century's going to do it, like North Hennepin's going to do it, and that in the metro, in Normandale and North Hennepin, those are the community and technical colleges that must close this gap. But we need some help. And that was Grant's point earlier when he introduced us. So the unemployment gap would close forever on the north side if we could find a way to use those pathways, right, to get 2,000 people jobs. Hennepin County. Hennepin County last year analyzed their entire workforce. If David Huff, the county administrator, were here, he'd give you this speech. We have over 500 job descriptions in county service. Their workforce is 7,200 people. They have 500 different position descriptions, which he proudly announced he's got down to 370 now. And they began working with us. After all, we're government, they're government, remember? And I asked them, could I be their senior training officer? And they said, no, we have one of those. But that's what I tried to do. From our perspective, we just wanted to get in their hair. From their perspective, they analyzed their workforce and discovered, oh my goodness, their estimated retirements through 2020 are 32% of their workforce, or about 2,200 people. And the job descriptions that are hit the hardest are entry-level job descriptions, many of which currently require a bachelor's degree. So we said to them, will you please, in your human services entry-level job, HSER it's called, change your job description from bachelor's degree to associate degree friendly? And they said, of course we will. In fact, we'll change it so that it can accommodate a 9-credit fast-track course funded by the Minnesota Department of Employment and Economic Development. And that's what they've done. And the first cohort graduates next week. There are 24 people in the class. They're all getting interviews. They have a month-long internship, and we hope step right into that job description. So do you see how Christie's formula, all of which is important and necessary, would mature into a job in county employment? We have 45 Northside students in the Human Services program. So we're figuring it out. It all fits together. If we can attract them at the high school level, if we can continue to pull them through to college, if we can deal with the financial issues you read about on the front page of the paper when we announced the closure of 6 programs, the suspension of 6 programs, to be really precise about it, Saturday. If they can get internships while they're in college, the way they now get internships at the high school level, thanks Mayor Rybeck and U.S. Bank CEO Richard Davis, 20,000 step-up internships in a decade. If we can continue that progress through the college experience, which Hennepin County is helping us do, that's where our students are going. They're the next public officials in the state. And it's a really old formula, Don. That's what you guys did a long time ago. You decided you would make government service available for every population. The big civil rights struggles in this state, and every ethnic group moved into, as Peter McLaughlin will tell you, moved into public employment as a way to support their families. It's not that hard. It's a delivery system. Let's get on it. That's our point. So, one last comment on the value of a credential. Itasca, Minskew, MSP went and the county did something very interesting for our campus last year. They decided we needed software. So we now, every day, get all the job postings in the whole metro through a magical software system called Wanted Analytics. So we don't have to guess anymore what the value of an associate degree credential is. There it is, reported out as of May 26th. The value of an associate degree was, for all the job postings in the metro, $51,450. That's across all experience levels. That's not just starting, but that's a fair comparison because we measure the value, a median salary across all those who have earned high school diplomas only, across all experience levels, and they're at about 35. We can watch this every day. It moves every single day. We report it out on our website. We want the students who are investing $10,000 in MCTC education, Larry, to understand that the ROI is immediate. That return on investment will happen in year 1. And the Hennepin County Human Services track pays almost $19 with full health and pension benefits. They are in the middle class. You cannot get in the middle class, by and large, unless you're Bill Gates, unless you get a credential. So you got to get a credential. It doesn't have to even be an associate degree. It can be what Christy described as the legal assistant credential or the administrative assistant credential or what we're doing with human services. But it can be what Grant talked about, which is the step up into a livable wage immediately, almost immediately in your college experience. So let me finish with Grant's story, because now we're going to come full circle to today. Grant took drafting, and he described how he laddered up using drafting to get the job drawing things at Boeing. Nice job in the 747, by the way, Grant. Yeah, that was beautiful. Today, what's going on is this. I had a Washburn student at our open house in October. He and his parents, great shopper, 17 years old, senior. He's going to go into our architectural technology program, which is the modern equivalent of drafting. It teaches computer-assisted design and Rivet, both of which are prized in the architectural field. He has a 100% chance of placement. They have placed all of their graduates in the last 2 years, and he's going to make $18 an hour at Ryan, one of the architectural firms, or another construction company. Then he's going to apply for tuition reimbursement at Ryan. It's $2,500 a semester, and he's going to go to Metro State or St. Thomas and finish his business degree, and then he's going to go get an MBA. All that time he will be earning a livable wage in his chosen field of architecture. If he goes to the School of Design, where Tom Fisher is busy working on a new pathway that would bring all MCTC architectural technology students into the School of Design, then he will have how many years? A lot. More than a lawyer, I think 4 or 5 years. But all those pathways will be open. So all of that, Grant, we'd like to start talking with people like you about when they're in 9th grade, and that's what Christy's trying to do. None of the interventions we've worked to date have been enough to close the gap. So don't think for a second that the Viking Stadium, though it is certainly a triumph for the region because of its diverse workforce, was really seized upon by K-12 graduates in Minneapolis. We're drilling down on those numbers. I'm not sure it worked. But all these pathways, moving across all those different occupational categories, moving across the interests of our students and getting involved in the lives of our students earlier, we need that. So thank you.
Your dad and Arnie Carlson were kind of talking about this kind of thing back in the 90s. What's taking us so long, and why isn't there more in the media and things about this? What do we need to do to bring this good work to greater attention in the state of Minnesota?
Well, I'd love Joe Nathan to answer that question because he's a skilled observer of that. So Joe, I'm giving you a 2-minute warning. I'm sure he has an answer. The gaps that have emerged in the last 10 years has surprised us all, I think. And I don't think people understand what's going on in the marketplace the way we get to, and we'd be happy to share what we know. The word on the street is that a college degree might not necessarily get you more than a barista job at Dunn Brothers, right? There's some of that. And we know the DEED data that was published a couple weeks ago with Larry's office, or several months ago. We know that the baccalaureate in fields like religion and humanities and psychology, I think, which remains the top McTcmovie major, is underperforming in related employment, not these pathways. These career and technical pathways are hitting 80, 90, 100% placement. So we're just going to yell that from the mountaintop. We're grateful for the chance to talk about the Viking Stadium because it's a palpable example. But we have to be able to do that, and Dane's helping us do that. Popularize the case for career and technical education. But here's the other thing, and you know that there is a long-time racial issue related to, best described in Malcolm X's amazing autobiography. You remember the story where he is counseled to be a lawyer, to be a carpenter instead of a lawyer, right? In his autobiography. That's become apocryphal. So parents don't necessarily want their young people, especially amongst communities of color, to go into the construction trades. And it's a big issue. And we're also dealing with households that don't have tools. We're dealing with high rental populations. So you're not learning around the household how to work with tools. So most of our construction trade students are coming from exurbia. The school you need to turn to on the construction trades to really see how it should work is St. Paul College. Rasul Dasmad, there's a very nice story about the president of St. Paul College on Saturday, has it figured out. They're in the high schools the way we will be on construction trades and have been for 5 years. They're putting together a Trades Up program that's funded by DEED that is spectacular. They've got a very close working relationship with the unions and the contractors. So we are trying to borrow some of what St. Paul College is leading in this region. Then finally, and I'll let Christy and Joe talk about it more, and maybe Larry, you have a comment too. We don't publish our facts. It took me 10 months to get a brochure out about placement rates in our program, and we have an outstanding set of program review data. For those of you who have worked in McTcmovie, we have the best data you can imagine on placement and wage data and program performance. We don't publish it, or it's buried in the web. So we have to be comfortable telling the truth about how high placing these programs are and what the wage level is, and not be worried about lawsuits.
I just wanted to add, I think, I started doing this work in January, and everyone says, like, why did it go so fast? And it's about going to the schools. It's not about going to the district. It's about going to the principals and the teachers, and they are the unit of change. And so I think that the district has come along, Minneapolis Public Schools have come along. You can tell that in their community school partnerships application that's coming on, that the unit of change is in the schools. But I was able to get so much more work done when I just engaged the counseling staff, I engaged teachers, I engaged principals, and they're closer to the students, they get it. And the district, not that they don't, but they're further away. And it doesn't have the impact when the principal looks in the eyes of his or her students and says, I need to do better. I need to have ethical relationships with those students, and then you get more done.
Another question here, and then Joe, be ready, because I'm going to call on you, okay? Do you guys have counterparts at Anoka Hennepin Public Schools, St. Paul Public Schools? Are they working, looking at what you're doing and designing similar things for their districts?
Yes. As I said before, Grant, in many fields, they're ahead of us. So, I mean, Anoka Ramsey has their legendary partnership with Irondale, and St. Paul College is doing, as I said, remarkable things in working with the high schools around trades. I don't know that anybody's doing what you're proposing on math.
I would say that with math and then the most recent legislation that allows developmental ed, if it's attached to an earlier middle college and an ALC or ALP, with our destination diploma to degree program. My understanding is there's a gateway program at Hennepin Tech, and St. Paul College is exploring that as well. But we are slicing that a little bit differently, and from what I've heard from MDE, ours is the only application they're anticipating.
But here's back to my core point, which is all of these community and technical colleges in the metro are really close to what the employers need, and they're delivering. They just need more students.
Okay, so that's a good segue to Joe Nathan, who works for the Center, well, he's the director of the Center for School Change, and has worked very hard on the whole issue of the post-secondary education option, and actually working to deal with some of the barriers that exist that keep more students knowing about this program and utilizing this program. So Joe, bring us up to date.
So Dane cautioned me before this program started about hissy fits. And this is your program, so I'll be brief, and I appreciate the chance to respond. I want to mention 4 quick factors for people to consider, and congratulations on this very important work. So I want to make sure that's clear. First, all of the examples that were offered here today are district schools, which is great. Between 20 and 25% of the kids in Minneapolis go to charter schools, and charters enroll a higher percentage of low-income kids. So work needs to be done with that sector of public education as well. That's one of 4 factors. Secondly, we have worked with Dane and MNCAN and Mctcmovie Communications, about 10 different organizations, to get information out to families. The MNCAN study that just came out, was just announced today, points out that there's a belief on the part of The majority of people in this state that the achievement gap, whatever one wants to call it, is basically because lack of family support. We see families all over the state, low-income kids of color, who are not getting information. Without pointing any fingers in this room, there is a huge issue with getting information out to families in different languages, even on websites, including MCTC. We've been having conversations. Accurate information is not getting out. So information in ways that families can use and kids can use, that's a second factor. Third factor is that, as you've said, the families, in some cases, have not had this kind of experience. And then the fourth is that we're failing to learn from some of the most successful higher education institutions in the United States, which are tribally controlled colleges and historically black colleges. We just had a meeting about that. So, and briefly, they talk about mentoring. They talk about a go-to person for every family. And sometimes what happens in post-secondary institutions and in high schools is that kids just drift away. So this is your program, but those are 4 factors to consider. And we are trying to have dialogues and collaborations with your institution, many other institutions about these, because there are opportunities, but families and kids are not learning about them, and or they're institutional. This is the last point. They're institutional barriers. You talked about the AccuPlacer. Please take a look at your website, what your website says about AccuPlacer and PSEO. Please take a look at what it says about the grade averages. PSEO was never written to say that kids have to be in the top third or top quarter. That was a guideline developed by Mctcmovie, but that's not what most of the two-year colleges are telling kids. So there are things to work on, but having said that, I think that you're doing really important work, and I want to make sure I said that.
Yeah. I think in terms of working with charter schools, I mean, I've only been at it since January. It's not that I'm opposed to doing that. We've been working with the Hiawatha Learning Academies because they're building a high school, and so we talked a little bit with their future principal about how they could hire teachers in such a way that they can maximize concurrent enrollment and to think about where they are situated in terms of bus lines and stuff with PSEO. I think that we're at a crux, too, I think in terms of changing what it is to get into PSEO. I mean, we've already... I think that we have 2 different kind of ways that we're looking at how we admit PSEO students, and we are more accessible than other institutions, but I don't think we do a good enough job of advertising it, so I think that's true, and it's part of a work group that we're putting together now is to think about, like, what are the drivers to really having someone be successful, because the worst case scenario is that students develop a transcript that shows that they failed. And so it's an ethical responsibility to make sure that all of the students are successful when they enroll in a PSEO course or in a concurrent enrollment course, because I don't want to set them up to have experienced failure because they're young and they didn't know exactly what they were getting themselves into. So I think that there is always that dance between being completely open access and then making sure that that the students can have the supports in place that they are successful.
And Joe, you've raised 2 of those 4 points with me, and we're working on them. Your points are all well taken, and I'd be happy to meet with your charter schools in the Minneapolis area from our catchment area whenever you'd like. I think we've got something to show them now.
Great. We've got a lot of good questions. Don't go too far, okay? Don't go too far. This is kind of a follow-up thing. What are you doing to reach out to find advocates in the African American community, the Hispanic community, in the Somali community, immigrant communities who champion what you're doing?
Well, we are blessed in Minneapolis, so we have nonprofit relationships that are at the level of our strategic plan with the Northside Achievement Zone, with Project for Pride in Living, with YouthLink, with Summit Academy. So we are spelling out for the chancellor, the president spells out for the chancellor what the nature of those relationships are and what we expect to get done in measurable terms. On the Viking Stadium, the partnership is with Lewis King and Summit Academy and St. Paul College. We have a healthcare partnership with St. Paul College that's unbelievable. You can attend nursing class at either St. Paul College or MCTC. You can pursue your LPN at St. Paul College or MCTC, and you can pursue your RN in a 3-year baccalaureate program at either campus. So we basically we are becoming one campus on some really important vocational areas. So the outreach effort, and we're very blessed because the communities of color, Somali community, the Latina community, and Phillips, the African American, Native American communities throughout the city, the Hmong community, are all very anxious to partner with us in education. They know this is the ladder up. There's a long tradition of that, again, coming out of the work of our elected officials for decades, but also our families. People understand how important education is. We're just missing some really high placing pathways.
I'm going to kind of focus this question about African American young males in North Minneapolis, and it just has to do with connecting with Sandra Samuel's Northside Achievement Zone, efforts to connect there.
So there are 534 households, I believe, now in the Northside Achievement Zone. If you ask what is their leading educational program, you will soon find out it's MCTC. So we're already there, and we've been there for a long time. We have, again, 1,952 students from the North Side. So the question is, what do we do with the student success issues that we know have been plaguing us for years? Math is a really big deal on the North Side. We are simply not getting people who can test into math under our current, perhaps flawed system. So we're addressing that. That's what Reimagine Math is all about. They're coming from neighborhoods that don't have any accountants, so how are they going to figure out business and accounting programs? Well, again, we have to be into the high schools with what used to be known as VOTEC. Everybody in this room will leave this and say, boy, I wish we hadn't gotten rid of VOTEC in the high schools. And I've heard that from thousands of people. And what we're trying to do is to recreate that structure, really. And it was powerful from, by most accounts in Minneapolis. It worked very well. Elizabeth Fish, the founder of MCTC, said in 1914, we have an educational gap in this community, and I'm going to fill it. We're just doing what she said 100 years ago.
So this is asking you to elaborate a little bit more about what's going on with other MnSCU schools. You sort of mentioned Normandale Century. Do you guys meet in some group to talk about this so this gets replicated around the system, maybe even throughout the state?
I mean, in terms of the partnering with the high schools and so forth, I mean, in the MnSCU office, we have a P20 director, Paku Yang, and then Jessica Espinoza, who's our assistant. And so we work closely together to figure it out. We meet twice a year to figure out how we're doing this work, and people do it very differently. It's not in a sense of that we're all moving in the same direction, which hopefully Charting the Future will help to bring us together and bring us along in that way. But I think different people see it differently as to what is the value in connecting and how to connect. I think that's the key.
This is an interesting question about, there's always been this divide between academic and career and technical. Is there a way that in academic classes they can also have some kind of respect for what we would used to call blue-collar employment? And likewise, can we teach people who are doing sort of applied courses actually cover the academic stuff, the English, the math, but in an applied course where somebody sees the actual practical value of math to what they're trying to do, or communication to what they're trying to do?
I think two things. One is the legislation with the world's best workforce is critical, and I think some districts and some schools have embraced it at different levels. Minneapolis, I don't see it. It's not the same sort of buzz when I work with other districts in other areas. But I have been having really powerful meetings recently with the teaching and learning community within the district that's talking about the world's best workforce. And I do think that that gives you a lens in which to kind of integrate this work. As far as applied math and applied language arts and applied, like all the different disciplines, that's something that we're looking at as well. There's definitely pilots that Minneapolis Public Schools is using in terms of applied mathematics, where they have a math instructor and a CTE instructor in the same room teaching those concepts. And so that happens at Roosevelt as a kind of a way of thinking through that. And so we're starting to think about what does that mean for us in terms of how we deliver math. In our machine tool technology, in our welding classes, and those welding programs, there are applied math that they're doing that, but that's under the career and technical education banner. It's not under the math banner, so they don't get the MNTC goal transfer that is the gold standard in terms of moving forward. But we're working on that with our math division now.
And the market's going to correct this. So one reason why these are lower prestige jobs is because they haven't paid that well historically. That's going to change. I'll guarantee it's going to change, because we see the data every day. There is no stacked pipeline behind some of these career pathways, including, you see it now in the trades, right? Everybody's talking about it. The Viking Stadium, again, is 2,000 employees, and there's talk that it may have drained other projects of workforce of color talent. That's possible. You know, it's so big, and it's doing so well on its workforce diversity. But here's my point. We see on the software package wage rates. So we will watch wage rates climb as fewer and fewer people are coming out of these pipelines. They're not stacked. In Minneapolis, as Don knows, because I used to tell him about this, we can predict the future because we watch the building permit counter. The building permit counter will tell you what the economy is going to be in 18 months. Nobody watches it, at least the way I do, but we can tell you where at least construction trades are going to be 18 months before it hits. And so we could see the recession ending. We could see this big that's why we started working with the Sports Facilities Commission and Lewis King 2 years ago to try to cut this deal to make sure our students had opportunity in the Viking Stadium. So what's going to happen now is these, as we stated earlier, some of the reports are showing very low related employment and religion. I think if you have a religion degree right now, sorry Grant, you have a 14% chance of working in a church or related employment. So they're baristas, they're not working in churches, so the baccalaureate's getting a bad name, right? When in fact these career and technical pathways, human services is at 82%, architectural technology 100%, sleep therapy 100%, nursing almost 100%. They're taking everybody. So it won't take long for the wages to go up and for students to realize, wow, that's a good pathway.
So this, actually, this question leads to something I did want to ask you guys about. You know, what are the barriers that you're struggling with that the legislature, the city, the county, the school systems, or those of us who are in the audience help you with in terms of overcoming to make your program more successful?
Hyper-regulation. I've worked in 9 different organizations, 16 different jobs. I have never seen anything regulated like higher ed. From accrediting bodies to federal this to state that. It makes city service look like Innovation Inc. And it's a big honking issue, and it's named in the report that is itself become a football this week, Charting the Future, a wonderful report issued by Mctcmovie that charts the future towards the innovations we need, and we just sometimes don't move fast enough, and we don't get our websites done in 5 different languages. We just have 2. Or we don't publish the placement data that we receive, even though it's quite relevant, isn't it? So we've got work to do on moving forward, but a lot of times it's fear of lawsuits. For example, the proprietaries are being asked to be very careful about their data. So in Mctcmovie, of course, the easy path is to do nothing and don't publish, instead of risking that you might be off by 10, 15 cents an hour. So we have to work on that. We own that. We own some of that, but we've had accrediting bodies tell us who should serve as dean. Wow.
One last thing that is the fire under me is that we need to disaggregate who participates in PSEO and hold institutions accountable for that. And by that, just like K-12 disaggregates by race, by for free and reduced lunch status, we need to do that as well for PSEO, because there's a report that's given to the legislature, but in terms of holding us accountable for reaching out to all these different populations that deserve this state resource, we don't do well with that. So I would really love to see that kind of grow in terms of accountability, because I think that would change the conversation among post-secondary institutions as well.
What can we do for kids of color to make sure they aren't getting the least credentialed students in the school, teachers in the school?
Well, I think it's more about experience and not credential, because in Minnesota, we have plenty of teachers that meet the credential. When I came from Baltimore City, they hired 1,000 teachers every year just in the district. And most of those teachers did not have a credential. I mean, my first year I was sent home with a letter that as you go home with your friends and family, we're hiring immediately for anyone that is breathing. And so, like, that's not how we are here in the state of Minnesota. I mean, I think we do have credentials. It's about experience and cultural competency, and figuring out how do we, as the Board of Teaching, mandate cultural competency in such a way that it is infused in all of the standards, so that you're recruiting more people into that have the cultural competency foundation to start, because it's not a finishing point at that point as well. They need to continue to grow over their career. It's about experience and recruiting people that have the good experience and the cultural competency and the ability to work with a lot of disenfranchised youth, so that they can see how school has value. So I think in terms of K-12, we don't have a credentialing issue. We have an experience and keeping people in the field and invigorated and excited issue. And that's a whole different nut to crack. I mean, I think that has a lot to do with salary, but also it's work conditions. Like, you know, one of the reasons why I left teaching in Baltimore was, like, you know, we didn't have a photocopy machine. I had books that had Reagan as the president. Like, the working conditions were terrible. And so I loved my kids, I loved teaching, but if we can do more for the working conditions, you will keep the teachers you want to keep in the field.
Christy, what's wrong with that? Reagan was president. Oh, it wasn't history.
All I can say is, Christy, I don't know, I'm just very glad that you left Baltimore. We got you here. I just want to say, and Mike, thank you both very, very much for today.